Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas. And his Catholic faith is day 221. So let's get started. We're covering today questions 17 and 18 of the Tertia Pars, that is, of Christ's unity of being and of Christ's unity of will. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, a 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code Summa 10, and so here we go. Article 1, whether Christ is one or two. For a thing to be a thing at all, it must be one thing. It must have a unity within itself and be divided or distinct from other things. For if the tree, for example, didn't have borders and a unity within those borders, we could not call it a tree at all. Christ is one because of the unity of person across the two natures. And there is no additional human person, as we've discussed previously, because of what a person is as the most excellent subjective whole of a rational thing. See the episodes on the Trinity for how that works in God. But here, on account of the hypostatic union, the person of the human nature of Christ was always the second person of the Trinity that had that nature in the incarnation. And so Christ is one. Article 2, whether there is only one being in Christ. St. Thomas's response is to the point I began the last article with. He writes, everything is said to be a being inasmuch as it is one, for one and being are convertible. Therefore, if there were 2 beings in Christ and not one only, Christ would be 2 and not 1. So Christ has 2 natures. He also has qualities, his knowledge, virtues, gifts. He has his human body with its own size and shape. These are all distinguishable beings, or technically what we would call accidental forms, distinct within the one thing. And they are within the one precisely because they are all attributes of the one person, which is Christ. So although there are many distinct things about Christ, we would say non-essential forms in Christ, Christ, the Word incarnate, is one being, as St. Thomas concludes. But the being which belongs to the very hypostasis or person in itself cannot possibly be multiplied in one hypostasis or person, since it is impossible that there should not be one being for one thing. And with that, we move on to question 18 of Christ's unity of will. Article 1, whether there are 2 wills in Christ. If Christ has a human and a divine nature, then just as God not only knows but also wills, and human beings possess both the faculty of intellect and will, then if Christ is truly God and man, then he must possess both, a human and divine will. Article 2, whether in Christ there was a will of sensuality besides the will of reason. By will of sensuality, we mean the sensitive appetite here. This is the gambit of concupiscible and irascible passions we covered earlier in the Summa, which stem from sense perception. For example, when I see the slice of pizza on the table, or imagine a slice of pizza, or utter the word pizza, since I like pizza, I might feel a desire for pizza, or sorrow as to not having a slice of pizza right now. Passions like these are what we're talking about here. And since Christ felt sorrow and anger and fear, as we said in our last episode, then it is clear that he had a sensitive appetite along with the intellectual faculty we call the will. Lastly, and as a kind of aside, St. Thomas explains the term will of sensuality, what he means by that, in the following words. It must be borne in mind that sensuality, or the sensual appetite, inasmuch as it naturally obeys reason, is said to be rational by participation. And because the will is in the reason, as stated above, it may equally be said that the sensuality is a will by participation. Article 3, whether in Christ there were 2 wills as regards the reason. In a sentence from St. Thomas, in every order there is one first mover, but the will is the first mover in the genus of human acts. Therefore, in one man there is only one will, properly speaking, which is the will of reason. But Christ is one man. Therefore, in Christ there is only one human will. Article 4, whether there was free will in Christ. What do we mean by free will? We hear in this article choice, regards the means, but choice is the proper act of free will. Having a human will, Christ's choice was not determined. Choice is always about the means to some end. And although the natural end of the will is happiness, this is the term we use to denote the perfect fulfillment of the will, then although his will tended towards this end necessarily, based on the nature of the will, still the means to that end lay within his free deliberation and choice. And since this is the case for human nature in general, it was also the case for Christ's humanity, who then also possessed free will. Article 5, whether the human will of Christ was altogether conformed to the divine will in the thing willed. As simply stated by St. Thomas, in Christ, according to his human nature, there is a twofold will. The will of sensuality, which is called will by participation, and the rational will. Now it is clear that the will of sensuality naturally shrinks from sensible pains and bodily hurt, but in his will as reason, he always willed the same as God, which appears from what he says in Matthew chapter 26, not as I will, but as thou wilt. For he willed in his reason that the divine will should be fulfilled. Article 6, in our last article, whether there was contrariety of wills in Christ. In a word from the Third Council of Constantinople, according to St. Thomas, we confess two natural wills not in opposition, as evil-minded heretics assert, but following his human will, and neither withstanding nor striving against, but rather being subject to his divine and omnipotent will. So Christ's sensitive appetite never rose up against his intellectual appetite, which was then in its turn always conformed to his divine will. And although there were sorrows and struggle in Christ's sensitive passions, which he permitted in order to teach us patience and demonstrate his humanity to us, however, this did not make for contrariety of wills, as Aquinas says. If a man wishes one thing with his rational appetite and wishes another thing with his sensitive appetite, there is no contrariety, unless the sensitive appetite so far prevailed as to change, or at least keep back, the rational appetite. For in this case, something of the contrary movement of the sensitive appetite would reach the rational will. Yet this would not be fitting to the perfection of virtue and grace in Christ, that the fear or sorrow stemming from the body ought to prevail against the determination of his mind, and thus we can say quite confidently there was no contrariety of wills in Christ. And with that, we come to the close of another episode. We have just finished covering questions 17 and 18 of the Tertia Pars, that is, of Christ's unity of being and of Christ's unity of will. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.